G'day and welcome to Future Fantasy Empire. I'm your host, David Applegate, author of the book The Boyhood of Cade, Book 1, Empire of the Elves. And of course, I have Book 2, Power Games, and Book 3, Into the Elves Mound Out. Of course, this is primarily about my writing journey, but please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And don't forget, you need to have notifications on or you'll miss out on live stream notifications. Now, of course, on with the show. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about using social media, rumors, mainstream media to build your villains up, to look at the demonization of real life figures, to sort of get the idea to sort of create villainy in your antagonists. Of course, I'm working on that myself. And I spoke last week about the draft I had for a story about a sniper. And of course, there, the villainy is more in the deed than the story. The deeds show, don't tell. But when you're dealing with villains, of course, always show, don't tell. But this week I want to sort of touch on emotions, deploying in a dialogue, emotions, motives, etc. This helps in my own journey as I'm trying to improve my characters to give reaction. But one of the controversies in reaction is said, how things are said. Sometimes I don't use said. Sometimes I don't use tags at all. This seems to be rather controversial. There are people who put said in everything, except asked and replied. But it seems not using tags sometimes upsets people. Sometimes using alternative tags like whispered, reply, or messaged, or even texted seems to upset people. Or even using emotional tags like he grumbled or he moaned, hissed. Of course, the problem with show, don't tell is replacing said with emotional tags or putting in emotional responses. Or sometimes describing some people's faces, frowned, scowl, frowned or sad, seems to upset people. I really have to emphasize it's important when being a writer is you're not going to please everybody. But however, there should be a few people where you could get feedback from. These being beta readers. They sometimes other authors, though, they are not the best other beta readers, but sometimes they are. Most of them are going to be other writers, whether you like it or not. And sometimes it helps to really have at least some sort of relationship with your beta readers. And so along the way, you share your work with them and get feedback. And ultimately, yes, they will give you the right balance, I think, between keep you to your style so that because ultimately you want fans to be fans of you, not fans of your beta readers. But of course, ultimately, you have to find your style and your rhythm. And as you write, you're going to start writing more and more often, and you're going to produce a lot of material, most of which you'll never publish, most of which you'll be the only reader to. Reminds me of George R.R. Martin's Notebook, his infamous Notebook. I don't know if you've seen it or not, or whether or not this is true. Apparently, he used to carry around a huge notebook that for Game of Thrones that had all the different characters in it, and he shared it with but a few. And of course, this is notorious because it disappeared in the later periods of Game of Thrones. He was never seen or heard from again. And of course, he disavowed the later seasons, although many people now looking back think, was it Winds of Winter finished again? Oh, that's right, because he has to totally rewrite the material because nobody liked it. So he's disavowed his own material. You're going to do that. Everyone is going to do that. I don't think we can hold Martin accountable for that. But again, why would he finish Winds of Winter when there's no money in it? When there's a few $1,000s to be made every day, not finishing the book, but doing appearances and writing scripts. That's one of the things, I suppose, as a writer, you'll eventually come to pass, whether or not your career becomes writing novels, writing scripts. Your writing may come to pass. You brief fame or lots of fame for the wrong reasons, but you may eventually come to pass. But along that way, enjoy it. I mean, I think the joy of writing, you're going to write a lot of material. It's not all going to be read. Not everybody's going to like it. And of course, you're going to have to build those relationships with beta readers. And beta readers is where you're going to get the most feedback. And of course, you bet a lot of editing. You're going to be doing a lot of editing. And sometimes you're going to write, some months you're going to write more than others. You're going to have a mood and inspiration, and you're going to write chapters per month. Other months, you're going to go, I'm struggling to write 500 words a day. Other days, you're going to write. And this is the thing, I think, from Dickens through to trying to think, somebody more modern, they all wrote roughly a book, a novel, every 2 to 3 years. Whereas some, like Tolkien, wrote a lot, but published very little. And as you know, his publications started with a story he told his children, the Hobbit. And then 11 years after the Hobbit, he wrote the Lord of the Rings, which actually became the first book of the Lord of the Rings. And then he ended it with the trilogy, but then later published the short stories, and other materials have been published since, but most of it never going to be published. I think we can't really say it's a sin, but it does feel like a sin that Tolkien's son never really picked up the pen and finished a lot of that work and put out Tolkien Society the way they treat it. I mean, it's just so sad, really. But, how your work is handled after your death, most people, sadly, it's going to be a funeral pyre. But you never know. And that's the journey of writing. You never know. You never know how you're going to be received one decade to the next. But I think the conversation needs to be had with all and with yourself. Why are you writing? Are you writing for fame? Are you writing for money? 2 million writers out there competing with you for the same audience, which mostly is made up of other writers. This is the unfortunate reality we live in now, where the majority of people won't read. Refuse, I say. Others, I mean, I suppose if you get onto a bestseller list, there's between 10,000 and 100,000 copies, depending on how long you're on that list. So some people make a living, most people don't. And it's scary to think that the average income of a writer is skewed by the income of the really big writers like J.K. Rowling and so forth. So really, there are lots of people who are only going to make a few sales a month, period. So, some people make a living, most people don't. And it's scary to think that the average income of a writer is skewed by the income of the really big writers like J.K. Rowling and so forth. So really, there are lots of people who are only going to make a few sales a month, period. So, some people make a living, most people don't. And it's scary to think that the average income of a writer is skewed by the income of the really big writers like J.K. Rowling and so forth. So really, there are lots of people who are only going to make a few sales a month, period. So, whether you're rich, famous, tall, short, pen, paper, a pen and paper writer, sorry, or you're a what do you call it, typewriter, or a computer hack. You're tapping away on the computer. However you write, you're a writer. You're not a writer when you get published. You're not a writer when you get fame and fortune. You're a writer when you start writing. And it doesn't mean poets have their own name, but you're a writer with your short stories, novellas, novels, epics, trilogies, series. And there's some who don't hit it with the first book, second book, third book, fifth book. There are others who've hit it with the first book, and that's it. Nothing since. There are some people who only produce one book. But back to Said. I think it's one of the most controversial subjects that I've ever come across. And I don't really understand the vitriol that some people have for alternatives to Said. Now, that doesn't mean they're right or wrong, but I think it's their style, and perhaps they feel their style is under threat. But I suppose they took it as an attack not to use Said. But see, let's just say use Said most of the time. But if you want an alternative, of course, to break up the rhythm so that you don't have... See, if you just went with the 3-8, 3-8, 3-8, short, or the short log, whatever you want to call it, where you just alternate the lengths of your paragraphs and try to keep the descriptions to a minimum. Congratulations, you are a textbook writer. You're allowed to be that textbook writer. But if you want a style, you're going to have to start using alternative rhythms and alternative methods. So let's see, in normal speech, you could say said, added, announced, answered, explained, question and reply, asked, he questioned, he asked, he replied. Now let's go for emotion. He begged, he complained, he confessed, he cried, he pleaded, he promised, he sang, he scoffed, he vowed, he disavowed. Of course, softly. Add some emotion as well, like hissed, moaned, mumbled, murmured, muttered, hissed, squeaked. And you can actually get some emotion in there too. Whispered. It's just, see, here's the standard ones. Whispered, said, asked, and replied. Instead of said, he said loudly, you could say he barked, he blurted, he screamed, he hollered, he cheered, demanded, exclaimed, instead of using exclamation marks, hollered, laughed, scoffed, screeched, shouted, although a bit of that maybe does not make sense, that a long statement would be like, that would be for short. Hey you, he barked. It was me, he blurted. You actually do get these. They're rare. But he laughed. Maybe, yeah. but usually on its own. But I can actually understand maybe questioning them through a few and their uses and really saying, well, they're limited. And that's true. They are limited. You wouldn't use them all the time, and you wouldn't use them. I would use added maybe in a somebody after a pause. Depends, but it's not the only one. Punctuation. Sometimes, particularly using automated editors, it doesn't like your punctuation. You're going to have to decide. And most of the time, if it says the comma does not appear to be necessary, if it's an opening statement, like, hello there, my name is. Hello there would be either a full stop or a comma, depending on the pacing that you want to imply. One way is to introduce both rapid and confusing speech, of course, is to not punctuate speech other than quotations. For thoughts, perhaps put in italics. Though there's another one to said, a replacement for said. He thought, she thought, they thought. Especially with telepathy. You want to imply telepathy or some internal dialogue. Silent communication, sign language. So there's going to be alternatives. There has to be phone. A lot of people talk through their phone messaging. So you can't say he said unless on a comma on the phone, unless it is actually on the phone. He typed, he texted. Though some grammar programs don't like texted. A lot of people also with the patterns of speech. There you go into descriptions of how he said. Loudly, haughtily. He enunciated with all the airs and graces of an Oxford man, which doesn't mean much these days, but if you ever heard how they speak, yes, you would actually say, oh, sounds posh. That's another one. He sounded posh. He spoke with a thick guttural accent. Or you say he said with a certain accent. So he said, she said, really, actually starts to become very boring. So I don't know why some people just think said, and it's never been thought of until recently. There are alternatives to said. No, it's always been done. It's just sparingly, and most of the time, conversations between two people. But these days, there is a minimalistic approach and a maximum where there's a lot of novels, particularly that are very short, or they contain a lot of. This one I read recently contained a lot of descriptions of everyday stuff you really don't need to know. I almost felt at one point they were going to mention every time he went to the toilet. And also, they added drama. But the thing is, sometimes as you're reading, suddenly something pops you out of left field. Like, you're not going to get along with everybody, but when a main character meets somebody and they just don't like them, I mean, it does seem off. but it actually does happen in real life. So I guess, but I don't like it when things are left field, and there doesn't seem to be any. I just don't like him. Why? I don't like the way he speaks. Why? And that's just it. It doesn't have to make sense, I guess, but I'm trying to improve my writing, and I think ultimately it should make sense on some level. But at the same time, it's got to you've got to convey, I think, to the reader, and I think I've tried to do that with why in book one, Cade is the way he is. I think it, you know, think of it. He's a little kid. He thinks it's funny. Yeah, but you actually, as kids, little kids. You ever dealt with little kids? They the funniest things they'll pick may not make sense to you at the time, but the kids love to see adults confused and irritated. It's because it's different. They want to see, they're exploring through language. So if they can annoy you and get you to do something that you wouldn't otherwise do, they laugh. Because ultimately, and I think everybody should learn this, laughter isn't, when you think of something that's, laughter is a response to stupidity, or a ease of tension when you got your way. Your anticipation is building up, and then the tension is gone, and you laugh. It's over. It's over. Finally, there, you know, that's why mockery and absurdity are what we laugh at. So kids are going to do stuff that are, and I think most people accept that with book one and book two. It's serious manipulation, each poking each other and most of the implied, I'll do something, I will. You don't need to really say that. It's just the tension is just there without. It's intellectual. Two people plotting against each other, and they're talking around the plot, sort of hinting at each other that, you give me this, and I get that, and you get that, and I can do this for you, and it's a recognition. The whole point of book two is a recognition and the peaceful transfer of power, which is rarely seen. And it's a book about the transfer of power. You outwitted me, you have the wealth, and now I'm going to give you the power in return for a little bit of power and wealth. Rather than you just can't. I can scream, I can shout, you don't need to say that the old man will scream, shout, cling to the throne. Instead, he's going to transition power. But, you have to give up along the way. You have to give up what you could take it all, but if you want peace, you just have to give up stuff. And I think it's just all implied and really, I guess, implied. It's too intellectual for some people, but so be it. Not everybody's going to get the point. So, as I say with writing, not everybody's going to get the point. Not everybody's going to understand you. Not everybody's going to like you. I'm always suspicious but I have gotten professional 5-star reviews. So I sort of hope I know what I'm talking about when I'm saying you'll please those worth pleasing. And you won't please those who aren't worth pleasing. I feel I have the authority to say that if you don't please somebody, they're not worth pleasing. They're not going to be your customers. They don't like your style. I've had people who say, "Oh, I tried your book. I tried, honestly, but it's not my cup of tea." And then they say, "Are you a fan of science fantasy or not?" And this ain't the normal book I normally tried. So at least I got people to try and read a book they normally wouldn't pick up. And I'm grateful to the few people who've picked up and read my books. I wish more people did. Hey, but so be it. I'm not going to bully those of who I know who haven't bought my book, that you're out there. And of course, I have patrons, and I only have a few patrons. I hope to get more of you, to convince more of you to support my work, because honestly, along the way, as a patron of mine, you have early access. You'll see the chapter each month. You'll sort of get to get a bit of insight, early access, that sort of stuff. See the artwork. Of course, I have two patrons. One is for RPG material, which has a few, and the book, which they used to be. I just used to have one patron, but some people would say, "Oh, I'm only interested in this," and others will say, "I'm only interested in that." So I put the two separate, but overlap the artwork, sort of. But again, you can't please everybody. Some people just cannot be happy. As I just said before, when it comes to writing, you're going to please those who are worth pleasing. Those will be your customers. They will buy your book. They will follow you on social media, and they will not need to be poked or prodded or demanded to give you a review. Some people can't leave reviews on Amazon. I don't know what it is. Some people tell me I haven't made minimum purchases, or well, I purchased the book and I posted it on Goodreads, but I posted it through Amazon and it only shows on Goodreads. So it's just one of those weird things. I don't think Amazon has their act together, and I don't think they ever will. They reach a certain level of arrogance, which very few writers ever get to achieve. And that is, you can write anything, and there are very few writers who can write anything and it will be picked up and published. And that's sad. And I've had people say that, the few who've given me 5 stars, and some have given 4 stars and said that it's better than other published books out there. But I think science fantasy is just one of those genres that is so dominated by movies and, well, so dominated by Star Wars and superheroes these days that people don't explore. I remember growing up with very few franchises, and people explored. They went to bookshops and explored the shelves. There are people out there who go looking for obscure books, and I think they still exist. But then again, I'm self-published because I couldn't convince any what do you call it? Agent, I suppose. The problem is, and this is, I think if J.K. Rowling she moved to London. She was an obscure Scottish nobody, and they didn't want to publish her. So she moved to London. She'd left her husband and moved to London to get published. Some people would call that following your dream. But your dreams. But really, Then again, it's easy to not like J.K. Rowling. But you have to appreciate whether she wrote it on her own or came up with just the outline. I mean, that's the same with George Lucas. We all know now that George Lucas only came up with the outline for Star Wars. That he picked together scenes from the Hidden Fortress, based Luke Skywalker on Flash Gordon, and had a couple of guys, including Lawrence Kasdan's father, and Lawrence Kasdan do most of his writing. George was called so often the ideas guy, but we mere mortals who didn't have rich parents or a rich benefactor, to send us to film school named Fox, to allow us that idle time to build stories. It would be, and like I said, I think many times, it would be too easy to hate upon successful people. But unfortunately, I do sort of think the success should go to more the writer than the producer or director. But things being the way they are, directors and studios work hand in glove to oppress the writer. It's the writers are all, because it's such a long process. Writing is, you think, the director. I mean, there's lots of stuff, but he has, Star Wars, thousands of people building sets and sound studios and actors and standing on shoulders of so many people, whereas the writer, unless they're in a writing team, they often stand alone, particularly in the world of script writing. And script writing isn't always just stripping away everything down to the bare bones conversation and putting in the tags, locations, etc., and trying to, and leaving it up to the director and everybody else to come up with everything that fills in those gaps, because ultimately, when an artist is when an actor's given a script, it's up to the director to direct them. So often people mistake the art direction for the genius of the writer, and often mistake the delivery of the actor for the genius of the writer. And it's amazing, isn't it? The most remembered lines from Star Wars were written by Lucas, but they're often misremembered. No, I'm your father. Not, I'm your father. Something like that. It's just one of those things. It's like Kirk never said, "Beam me up, Scotty." I think that was actually closest he ever said it to was Scotty wanted to beam up. Actually, I don't know where people got that "beam me up, Scotty" statement from, but making a cultural impact, well, that comes with. I think that comes from, if you have something original enough, it'll make an impact. I often think there's where's overlooked in writing is sometimes it takes volume of writing. Think of Hemingway, and what do you say? Out of 100 pages, only one will be published. No, actually not. Out of 100 pages, only one would be worth publishing. Yes. He actually had an entire library of papers, many incomplete books. When the Cubans took over his house in Havana, actually, I don't think it was in Havana, but it was actually on the outskirts. But it was already filled with incomplete books, unpublished. I think it was eventually all put together. Hemingway diaries, wasn't it? All put together. A sort of rough, loosely based on Hemingway was the Rum Diaries, although it's hard to know. People think Hemingway worked for American intelligence. I think he was British intelligence and always was up until the end. I think he only... people forget he was a reporter. Most of the stuff he did, though he did very little reporting throughout his life. He mostly collected a paycheck from different newspapers just to have ghostwriters just to occasionally write a little piece here and there. Sometimes when you're that famous, I mean, I think when we look back on some of the famous writers, they were unchallenged. We have to deal with the fact that we are all now challenged by each other, and we shouldn't see each other as a threat. I mean, I'm definitely back in the old days. Writers didn't see each other as a threat. When Mary Shelley pitched Frankenstein, she didn't feel threatened telling her fellow writers her ideas. She built and workshopped her a book. I'm not sure if it was her only book or just the only book that got published. There is contention that whether or not she wrote it all at once or it was workshopped over many years. That's another thing. But some people, to be a famous writer, some people thought you had to move to London, others to Oxford, like Mary Shelley, who hung out with Tolkien and others. Or, like in the case of Stephen King moving to, and J.R. Martin. I think it was J.R. Martin doesn't live in California anymore, but I did believe at one point he was a scriptwriter in California. Do you believe he lives in Arizona now? I'm not sure. I have just heard something recently about him he actually got paid a lot of money to write from some of the royalties from movies he's written or edited. There's a lot. Actually, sometimes, well, it depends what type of writer you want to be. I mean, if you build up a good reputation as a script writer, you'll actually get a lot of work where you'll have directors pay you money to keep your name off their script because they just want you to polish it. They don't want you to be famous. They want written and directed by George Lucas. But, you can actually do that. You get away with it if you have an agreement with somebody at the time. Though it eventually came out that he didn't solely write, and a lot of the dialogue he wrote was cut. But shouldn't mention that every episode. Should just try to find other examples where ghostwriting has become, where the ghostwriter actually, that has happened. I can't remember who right now, but there are instances allegedly where the ghostwriter has gone on to become their own thing. There are famous ghostwriters. And there are what they're called, ghostwriters to the stars. You'll see these books all the time, particularly big names who come out with these big tick books after Yeah, wouldn't it be great? I think, although I don't know exactly um, how this works, but wouldn't it be great to have an institution buy 100,000 copies of your book, just like Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama or anybody like that? But then again, didn't their publisher go broke, bailed out, or bought out? Forget which. I think both. But one of the hardest things I think would be about ghostwriting is to not have your style shine through. Yeah, I started this about SAD, improving, basically about, well, this journey is about improving, sharing my tips, my struggles. One of the struggles I have is my poor grammar, my poor spelling. Sometimes I revisit my script, my book. Wish I probably, sometimes I do wish I put more into the amount of errors. I mean, sometimes it just boggles the mind when I look at the raw compared to the finished product, although I don't think I have the original. I have many iterations, but you know, we all have our struggles. None of us are perfect. I think, I don't know, the people who spend thousands of dollars on advertising just don't have it. I burnt through it. I know I'm probably getting in trouble for saying it, but don't advertise on Facebook. And even even Amazon ads aren't worth it anymore. Um, saw this tweet the other day while I'm thinking of it. Be the person who buys the self-published book. That $5 is not a cup of coffee. It's not about the money. It's about supporting somebody who put years of their life into their book. And you think about it, most of the people on the top 100, they're professional writers, they're journalists, or the lucky few who picked up by script writing, or they went to college or university and got picked up by a publisher through one of the. They didn't have to pay the thousands of dollars some people pay every year to enter competitions. They got submitted through their college or university. Because don't forget the point of being a publisher has been a gatekeeper to minimize the amount of published material every year so that the public will go, geez, I want something to read this month. I'll buy this because it's the only sci-fi or the only mystery or the only fantasy or in some cases uh, not the only one, but the only one, in that particular bookstore, in that particular category from a handful of writers. Even in mystery, I mean, you look at it, romance, mystery, there are so many writers. I was surprised to see. Yet there are so few successful writers. And I don't mean successful and famous. I mean just success to have more than one book. It's scary to think. And it's amazing when I look at the Japanese writing scene, and some writers, they 20, 30 books, and they've written a book a year, although they're actually shorter, like 75,000 or less. They're between 65 and 75,000 words. So they're shorter. And a lot of them, oh, wow. And I think, writing's a highly competitive field. It's like sports for intellectuals. It's the Olympics of intellectuals, really, if you think about it. To stress one's mind to the point where you're bending the thought processes, to stretch your imagination beyond what you know, to think of things that don't exist, to have conversations with people who aren't there and not be considered insane. It really makes the trivial, it really pales in comparison, and it really seems trivial looking back, all the debates and arguments that I caused by just saying, or really not just saying it. I published a couple of different memes about said and alternative tags and uses of tags. And it seems to be there are a lot of people out there, and I do believe they use the Universal Handbook for Writing, well, or Stephen King's Guide to Writing, or The Art of Writing, which I think is The Art of Writing. Who's it again? I should actually look that one up. I'm not sure if that's another one by Stephen King or. Those are the two big ones. The Art of Writing, Unclaimed. Yeah, that's right. It's attributed to many scholars over the year. UC Berkeley and others use it. The Art of Writing. I think it dates back to what's his name? Trying to think. I can see him. Many people have used the title, The Art of Writing, The Art of Creating Writing. Samuel Clemens, I think, was Samuel Clemens is better known as Mark Twain. He's actually credited with actually writing the first writing textbook for Americans, The Art of Writing, or the first edition of it. But there is the Oxford edition, and there is actually the University of Chicago edition. And of course, there's the one with the Stephen King that I think was Berkeley, I think. But yeah, Stephen King's Guide to Writing and the forward in The Art of Writing. But The Art of Writing's been reprinted and rewritten by many authors over the years. But I think Samuel Clemens was the first textbook. The 3-act broken into 2 parts. So basically you have every book, every genre has its length. You break it into 3 parts. And then what you have is break the 3 parts into 2 parts each. And you'll have about 15 to 20 chapters. So you spread the, so that you have 2 to 3, sometimes more in the middle than in the ends. And so it's like a bell curve where you have, so you have the country lane, the cyclone, the getting to Oz, then meeting the various characters along the way. And as it comes down, so it comes up, meeting characters, kill the witch, kill the wizard. Well, expose the wizard. I mean, that's pretty much it, you know. 15 to 20 chapters, all short. And a lot of people stick to that formula. A lot of people have made a whole career of chiding others. I mean, but each their own style. I mean, I would prefer that people have their own style and not be judged for having a different style. I think there's so much focus on style over substance. Look for the gem, the hidden gem. Enjoy the art, the story. Does it make sense? What's but not being said? Is it implied? The relationship. That why doesn't he, like take care? Why doesn't he call out of his grandfather? Well, love and respect. This is a 10,000-year-old wizard. You're just a little kid. You may poke around the edges, but you confront the old guy and he's just going to turn around and say, hey, I've lived. Have you? Of course, one of the only reasons, I think I've spoiled it anyway. Spoiler alert, that Cade's demonically possessed, and that sort of gives him a little bit of leeway because he has amazing powers. And Takahiro is a man of power. He respects power more than power over knowledge, wealth, privilege. Those are things, they have value. You impress people. I think that's, wisdom is merely remembering. Well, the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Intelligence, I know I'm going to burn my fingers. Wisdom, I could work out. Wisdom is having the intelligence not to make mistakes. Or learning from others. Whereas intelligence is just merely remembering. I think I've tried to portray the game of so that's one thing I didn't like about the Game of Thrones. It was a game of, it wasn't really a game of politics. It was a game of murder. And ultimately it devolved because there was no longer rhyme, rhythm, or reason in that for the murder. It just became murder for murder's sake. There was nobody to be afraid of. There were no authorities. The Council of Lords were never appeared. The little council never even seemed to even bother. I mean, it's like, and I mean, in Game of Thrones, they left so many unanswered questions. I mean, now Star Wars is having the same issue. I think one of the things going forward is I'm going to try and avoid needing to write a prequel, needing to go back and explain something, a plot hole. If a plot hole's there, it's there. I'm not going to fill it. It's just treated as use your imagination. People realize that, or people remembered unreliable narrator. This war came to an end. Did it start 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? When fighting off and on, we had sort of peace. This planet may have known peace for a long time and didn't realize that the others were still fighting, or they went off, or they had groups out there still fighting, and even not knowing that these two back here had made peace already. Not going to go delve into history that doesn't need to be delved into. Reminds me of a game I played a long time ago, Dungeon Siege. The title had nothing to do with the game, and you know, you didn't lay siege to a dungeon. You raided, and you didn't raid a dungeon. You raided a few, but most of the time it was a walking simulator. When you're writing a book, try to keep that in mind. Where sometimes you can get away with the title not having meaning or having a subtle reference. But I don't like the idea of working the title into actual dialogue, although there are genres where that is. I don't exactly um, think right now. I mean, what action adventure? I think. Oh, one thing most people don't realize: James Bond. He started this whole creeping business, not the MCU. The MCU, and you look at it, Iron Man is James Bond in power armor. So you have that. But I mean, I think find your style, find how much dialogue tag you want to use, and find how much of yourself you're willing to put into it. I mean, and I think as most people, if you enjoy writing, you're going to do well. You don't have to, if you cast aside the idea of being famous and fortune and winning fortune and going on these amazing book tours, and because you remember, and a lot of people don't think this happened. A lot of the time, J.K. Rowling has made appearances with only nobody's turned up. Hardly anybody's turned up. There are times. I mean, you've got to remember, she made her money from a movie and paid in advance for a movie series back when Warner Brothers was up to their eyeballs in cash. No deal has been done like that before, and no deal like that been done since. And that's unfortunate. I think that's one of the reasons why Warner Brothers is in so much trouble, because they gave one all the incentive and none for anybody, and nothing for anybody else. So they're not getting the best work out of people, because they look at J.K. Rowling and ask themselves the same question: why is she worth $1 billion when I've produced 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the income? Where the script writers who've probably done a dozen movies that have made $1 billion and not even seen 100,000 from each. I think that's, and of course, people have joined writing associations and found themselves not getting very well supported by them either. But things are always changing. And I think eventually we will see a golden era again of writing, I think. I think we may live to see a golden era of writing again, where media creations like J.K. Rowling aren't celebrated because because feminists have a political agenda and want to haul one of their own onto their shoulders. No, I think we'll start to see a public choice, particularly as Amazon collapses around us. We're watching it now occur slowly. I think as others, new publishers or new self-publishing platforms rise, we don't know whether existing will take over or rise up. But what we do know is that Amazon won't be around in 30 years unless something dramatically changes with that company, because they're losing money. anyway. And what's it care? How do you care? When you're a self-publisher, you're not going to care eventually. I mean, those platforms, they only offered you big money to lure you in, but now that they don't need you, they don't care. They're not, you know, golden era will come again. It's just inevitable, particularly with people chasing or leaving the mainstream media, chasing new entertainment. And like I said, I think writing is the Olympics of intellectuals pursuit, and people are going to eventually realize that yes, writers are worth more than we treat them, and hopefully that they come soon, and people actually start realizing that, geez, $5 ebook is actually a bargain considering how cheap, how little authors make off these. You may want to you may think how little writers make off their books. It's scary, and the publishers make so much. But then again, we still live in a society that doesn't respect intellectual rights. But that, like I said, when that changes, there'll be a golden era of writing. Thank you all for listening. I'll see you all on the other side. Bye for now.